Just because my government is nice right now and protects my individual freedoms does not mean that it's going to be the same way in the future. I like to think about Bitcoin as a bet against a chaotic and unfair world. Nowadays, people are just complacent and they say Bitcoin is perfect and we shouldn't change anything about it. But in fact, it still has some issues that need to be solved.
Hi Vlad, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there.
So let's start with our first question. What was your orange pill moment?
I think my orange pill moment was when I realized that all of mainstream media basically lied to me about what Bitcoin is and what it does. Because I really wanted to buy in 2015, 2016, but I was reading all of these negative articles about Bitcoin being dead. And then the price came back to $1,000 in 2017. And that's when I realized that there's a disconnect between what the media tells me and what the markets are actually doing. And it was actually the price coming back to its previous high of $1,000 that made me think for myself and realize, there should be something here.
And how did you stumble upon Bitcoin? Like, was it a friend who introduced you, or were you already into tech? Or
Oh, I wish I had a friend like that, but no. I've actually searched for all my records, all my emails and messages to see if anyone ever told me about Bitcoin. That was not the case. I stumbled upon it ironically on a meme page that's called 9gag.com.
Mhm.
And there was this comic strip that was presenting someone who was getting robbed. And the robber was saying, "Give me all your money." And the person being robbed said, "Well, I don't have any money. I just have Bitcoin." And then the robber felt bad for the person and gave him some dollars and said, "Here's this, you need it." And I actually searched on Wikipedia to see what Bitcoin is, and I saw that they were advertising Bitcoin at the time as technology for people who don't have access to banking,
Mhm.
and also something that's being used to buy drugs on the darknet.
Yeah.
And when I read that, I was like, it's not for me. I'll pass. But I kept thinking about it afterwards, and I actually wanted to buy a year later.
Hmm. That's very interesting, actually. That's like you stumble upon a 9gag post because, like, back in the days, that was very popular. I remember that we were like used to sending memes to each other with my friend group as well from 9gag too. So that's and then what happened? Like, how did you buy your first bitcoins? Because back in the days, there wasn't many exchanges, or like at least in Hungary, it wasn't easy to buy bitcoins.
I don't recall exactly. Maybe it was Bitstamp or something, one of these European exchanges. But
Okay.
this was before Binance was created. And yeah, you're right. There was no Coinbase in Europe.
Yeah.
There was Bitstamp. There was something called Bitcoin Romania. I think I registered with an account, but I never actually used it.
Mhm.
And there were a bunch of ATMs, but I didn't know about them. Yeah, there were not too many options. There was Bitfinex, I think, that worked, especially for fiat to Bitcoin on ramp. It was hard to find. So yeah,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
right.
Because I started a little bit later than you actually did, but we had to use local bitcoins
Oh
to
yeah, that was around, but I did not know about local Bitcoins. I just searched on Google, like, where can I buy Bitcoin? And I just found the first few results and I searched for the one that had a good reputation.
Mm. And so at first you started to buy Bitcoin, and as I hear, it was an investment at first, at least. And then what
Oh
happened?
yeah, I spent most of 2017 trading. And I remember I sold at like 3,000 and then I bought Ethereum at 300 and then I sold the Ethereum at I don't know what. And by the end of the year in December, I think I've made a few $1,000s just trading like this. And then I realized that Ripple was going to $2. And I was like, there's no way this is gonna go up because it was 20 cents for the rest of the year. So I'm gonna short it. So I shorted Ripple and I got wrecked because it actually went to $3. I lost all my gains. And I basically started 2018 like in January. I had to start from scratch. I had to start clean, and I stopped trading and I actually focused on accumulating. And I got my first job in Bitcoin, writing articles for a website that was called Crypto Globe. And yeah, that's how my journey actually started. In the beginning, it was just speculation. Then I actually started to study.
Yeah, and then it's very hard to actually like look back to these days when I think all of us go through this journey that you start to like experiment with trading, and then you realize that if you actually just bought Bitcoin, you would have been better off holding it without the
Yeah,
trading.
but you don't know that. You have to actually learn it. And also, in hindsight, we're all geniuses. Like, I'm not sure if people buying and holding Bitcoin today will get the same like exponential gain that we have had.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it's gonna become more boring and more like gold in a few years.
Yeah, that's for sure. And then what was your experience in 2018? So then you started to work. You had your first crypto job, and then that was the ICO booms year as well. So I assume that you actually like went through a couple other coins as well before you became a Bitcoin maxi.
No, I don't think I ever bought ICOs. I didn't care too much about them.
Okay.
They were all the rage in 2017, especially in November and December. And then in 2018, we actually had the largest of the ICOs launching, which was EOS. But I never actually bought that. I did not understand why anyone would actually care about it because it was obviously more centralized than Ethereum and it had some of its own quirks. Of course, it had better scalability, but in a more centralized setup with their DPoS, which is delegated proof of stake. Anyway, I was not into ICOs, but I did like and I still like Litecoin. I think it's useful. I actually wrote some articles and newsletters for the Litecoin Foundation back in the day. And what else? I was a fan of Ethereum Classic, which was the clone of Ethereum that was proof of work and did not choose to compromise when they had that DAO incident.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the one that was closer to the spirit of Bitcoin and code is law, which I thought at the time was the way to go. And I still think it's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And what else? There were not too many of these coins. Yeah, I think those were the ones I cared about at the time.
And what inspired you to start your podcast?
I think it was two factors. The big one was in December 2018 when I was editor in chief at Crypto Insider. That the bear market was so brutal. We went basically in 1 month from like $8,000 to $3,000,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone was tense, and we had no idea if we're gonna get paid that month. Nobody knew what was gonna happen. And it was this state of uncertainty that actually pushed me to think of other ways. I was like, okay, so if I'm not gonna get paid, then I might as well work for free. And if I have to work for free, why don't I just start my own project? So I started my podcast in January of 2019. So after the December bear market moment, which was really painful. I don't think that the current generation of Bitcoiners will experience that, but it was really, really painful. And there was also the unfortunate event that my grandma died
Oh.
in January of 2019. And I really felt like I needed to do something for myself because I don't know, it's a way of coping with loss and you need to do something. You got to keep yourself busy with something. And the idea of a new project actually got me excited to keep going and not feel sad about the world and everything around me. And also, my grandma always wanted me to be independent and encouraged me to try my own projects. And it felt like the perfect opportunity. And I've been going since. It will be 7 years in 2 months.
Yeah, like I think you have one of the longest running Bitcoin podcasts. That's for sure in the space. So I'm sure your grandma is like very happy about it, and she's proud of you for doing like this work for the community. And
I hope so, but I don't do it for the community. By the way, I do it for myself,
oh, okay,
and
okay.
that's how you keep going. That's my advice for content creators. Like at one point, you're going to realize that you sort of reach your goals and you satisfy the people who keep pushing you like, hey, you should interview this person and that person and you should cover this topic. They're going to run dry at one point. And if you don't have a passion or a curiosity that keeps you going, you're going to quit. And if you do it for yourself, which means that you learn what you want to learn from the people that you want, you're not going to keep going for too long. And I think this is the best piece of advice that I can give.
Well, thank you. I'm actually going to take your advice, to be honest.
Also, people don't really care about your work, no offense, but
no.
You're the one who cares most.
Yeah, probably. That's for sure. But like you always try to, for some reason, the episodes that I like the most is the least popular episodes, to be honest. Like there is only like 100 people that listen to that, and I'm like, okay, like I really love this episode. Like I was really curious about this person, and that other like person who I interviewed was like probably for me an icon or like a genius in the space, and then it's like it gets 100 listens. Like,
Oh, that's the state of the market, unfortunately. Like if you actually do something with Michael Saylor talking about $1 million per Bitcoin, you're gonna get 10,000, 20,000 views or something on YouTube. But if you do one that's about a deep dive into something technical, there are not too many people who care. Because for better and for worse, most people in the space are tourists and they come when the price is up and they just leave when it's not interesting anymore. And the ones who actually stick around to learn are not too many. And there's a lot of competition for content for these people. So you have to actually give them something that they want to watch.
Yeah, it's like an attention economy, so that's for sure. We are like competing for that. But who was your favorite guest so far, or did you have anyone that you really enjoyed recording, or was an idol for you?
Oh man. I mean, it's like asking a parent which one of your children is your favorite.
Oh,
I'm
they
like,
always do that.
I had to work hard for all of them, to be honest. Only a few of them came easy. I had to travel to conferences. I had to network with people. I had to actually make some effort. The hardest one to get actually required me to travel to Argentina 2 years ago. And
Oh,
I
okay.
went to a conference and I had to meet Sergio Lerner in person. He's the architect of Rootstock, which is the first Bitcoin sidechain. And also he worked on a lot of interesting stuff in Bitcoin, including ASIC boost for ASIC miners, basically, so that they get an advantage when they use it. And also he's the one who did the Satoshi research. Satoshi is what he called the project where he searched to see how many coins Satoshi mined. So every time we mention that Satoshi mined 1 million Bitcoin, it's actually his research from 2013 that we are referencing, except that people forgot that it was him. It became sort of common knowledge. But if you go to his blog, which is called Bitsblog, if I'm not mistaken, you're going to find all the articles and everything that he wrote. And I was really interested in having this guy on my show. He kept delaying and saying, no, I can't this time, maybe next year, blah, blah, blah. And then I actually had to meet him in person. So that's a difficult one. Another memorable one is Phil Zimmermann, who is the creator of PGP. PGP is the email encryption technology that was also used by Satoshi to keep his communications private. But PGP also has this important role in cypherpunk history of fighting against the US government. Because in the early 90s, cryptography was still considered to be a weapon of war. And this man, Phil Zimmermann, basically created PGP and he published it on the internet for free as open source software so that anyone can use it for making their communication secret. And what happened is that the US government went after him. And he had to fight them in a court of law. It's a very interesting story because at the time they were printing the PGP code on t-shirts and they were sending books of the PGP code to other countries just to prove that there's nothing illegal in this. Like the post office will send it. It's just computer code. It's not a crime, but it was a big deal. And without PGP, we couldn't have Bitcoin because, first of all, Satoshi required PGP. Secondly, a lot of the open source cryptography that Satoshi built was basically owing its existence to the fact that PGP won against the US government. And thirdly, Hal Finney was the guy who worked on PGP. So he was the first employee of Phil Zimmermann. And he's the one who built the trusted setup for version 2 of PGP, which was very important, like a very important component to get it running and make it usable. And yeah, there are a lot of ties between PGP and Bitcoin, and I'm really happy that I was able to get that interview. And of course, I don't want to diminish the importance of the other ones, but these are on top of my head right now. You put me on the spot. I mentioned two that I find interesting.
Yeah, like I know that like many you had like so many guests along the years, so it's like hard to choose one or two, but there is always like one or two that stands out for some reason, or like it is a little bit closer to us than the rest of the episodes. So like, how do you protect your privacy these days? Because PGP is one of like encryption and privacy goes like hand in hand, to be honest. And Bitcoin also is one of the pillars of privacy these days. Do you yourself put a big emphasis on a day-to-day basis to protect your own privacy?
So I do use a VPN most of the time. And it's a way to protect myself also from advertisers and corporations that spy on me. And something that you have to understand when you deal with privacy is that it has layers. Like you're always private against someone, but not private against someone else. And you have to understand who is your adversary and what kind of data you're trying to hide and from whom you're trying to hide it. And VPNs are not perfect, as in, you're not going to be able, if a nation state really wants to track your communications and decrypt your data, I think they're going to have a very easy time going through your VPN. Even though the one that I use, which is called NYM, has this mixnet, which basically generates noise and mixes all the communications, and it's really interesting. So that one is a lot more difficult to track. So privacy, when you talk about it in the Bitcoin context, has 4 dimensions. It has the network level privacy, which comes with Tor or VPNs or NIM, which is a mixed net, all of this stuff, which basically hides your IP address and makes it difficult for someone to identify where you come from and basically which ISP you're using, because that one can also, ISP is the internet service provider, the company to which you're paying your internet bill, because your IP address is tied to your ISP. So people, for example, when you access somebody's website, your IP address is going to get logged, and they're going to know where you come from and what time you accessed and who is your ISP. And I try to keep this private as much as I can by basically using a mask. That's what a VPN or Tor is. It's a mask that you're putting on so that you appear as somebody else, somebody else's server or computer. But in Bitcoin, you also have sender privacy, receiver privacy, and amounts privacy. The only one that Bitcoin really has and that you can get is receiver privacy, because from your wallet, you can generate a new address every time you receive a transaction. So that one is also in the white paper. It's chapter 10. Satoshi described it. Unfortunately, Bitcoin is like this open system where you can see everybody's transactions. So it's not very private. It's maybe deniable in the sense that you can say that it wasn't you, it was someone else who sent the transaction. But it's not private because you can see all the transactions in a public ledger. And just because there is not information right now to reveal who actually sent the transaction or where the money comes from, there can be at a certain moment in the future more information when people make mistakes about their privacy, or when they just say it out loud and they say, well, it was me who sent this transaction. And then you can make connections. And I think the software for tracking Bitcoin is quite advanced nowadays. There was a very good privacy project from Hungary, where you're based, and it's called, and it still works, it's called Wasabi Wallet. And basically what it
Yeah,
does
they have.
is that it implements this Chaumian coin join. Chaumian comes from David Chaum. He's like the grandfather of cypherpunks. He came up with a lot of interesting ideas about how to mix data and how to hide in a crowd. And a lot of his ideas from the 1980s were used by Bitcoiners. I think Wasabi is super useful if you want to use a privacy tool, but beware of exchanges not accepting funds that have been mixed. So you have to understand that when you're going to be using exchanges which are centralized and KYC compliant, they don't like it when you don't have like a clear source for your coins. Another way, if you mix your coins, so if you already found yourself in this solution, in this situation, the solution is to basically send your coins 6 or 7 times to different wallets that you own at different times, not the same day, not the same hour, just send them randomly. And the blockchain analysis software will think that they have changed the owner. So that's another way to trick the software if you want some privacy. It's not scalable, it's not convenient, it's not user friendly, it just requires a lot of work and it's not very nice, but that's a way in which you can get it. Nowadays, I'm interested in privacy technology that we can implement into Bitcoin for this, and that's why I care so much about Zcash nowadays. It's so if you go back in history, the year 2013 I think was the most interesting in the history of Bitcoin because you had this massive bull market. That's also when I first read about Bitcoin and I dismissed it, but I didn't do any significant contribution, but a lot of people did. You had on one hand the banking types who saw Bitcoin as something promising and they said, we want to do Bitcoin 2.0 with contracts and companies on the blockchain and shares that can pay dividends and all of these ideas which come from the financial world, and they called it Bitcoin 2.0. And the first Bitcoin 2.0 protocol was launched on Bitcoin, and it's called Counterparty. It was launched in January of 2014. They actually burned like 1,000 Bitcoin to issue their token. So that 1,000 Bitcoin is never recoverable. They burned it forever just to find legitimacy for their token. At the time, I think the price of Bitcoin was like $600. So they burned basically like $600,000 worth of Bitcoin. And Counterparty is interesting because if you use it today, and I think Free Wallet is one of the best wallets, but there was also one that's called Horizon. It's a lot like Ethereum, and it was built on Bitcoin, and it's very interesting. You can issue your own token on Bitcoin. You can actually send it to people, and you can pay dividends to the people who hold it, and you can burn its supply. It's a lot like Ethereum, before Ethereum. And the other one that came from this idea of Bitcoin 2.0 was the Omni layer, which used to be called Mastercoin. That was also the first ICO on Bitcoin. And that one is where Tether was first created. So USDT, that nowadays gets traded on Tron and on Polygon and Ethereum and a bunch of other blockchains, was first created on Bitcoin, existed only on Bitcoin for like 2 or 3 years, and not too many talk about it.
Yeah, I don't know why like it never got actually like popular to make new projects or new like ICOs or new issue new coins on Bitcoin. And why did we only like actually think about it when Ethereum came up with the new protocol that everyone can use?
No, it was the scaling debate and the fact that a lot of developers wanted to have the option or the capability to build what they want on Bitcoin. And when they realized that they're going to be limited, and before the scaling debate, it was the upper turn war, which didn't last for too long. It was in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. And basically, the core developers decided to limit the size of an upper turn transaction, which was being used by Counterparty and Omni, so that they cannot put a lot of data into them. So this was the first inconvenience, and then there was the scaling war, which decided that the block size will stay limited. And when these developers saw what's happening, they just went to Ethereum. And conveniently, Ethereum had like the virtual machine and some extra options, like more programmability that Bitcoin did not have. And they built their stuff in there. But we have to remember that it all started on Bitcoin, and if you make a small effort, you can still find pieces of what was left in there. And there are still users who are into Counterparty today. There's actually a large Telegram chat with more than 5,000 users, and they're making, I think Counterparty is the place of the rare Pepe. If you're into Pepes, which is this green frog right here, then you're going to find a very interesting collection of Pepes that was issued on the Bitcoin blockchain. It lives forever on the Bitcoin blockchain, and they trade for a lot of money. In 2021, at the peak of the NFT mania, they actually found ways to bridge the Pepes from Counterparty to Ethereum so that they can sell them on OpenSea. That was sort of a very big business, to burn the token on Bitcoin, issue it on Ethereum, and sell it there so that it basically capitalizes on this larger market. But I started this story with the year 2013. There was the Bitcoin 2.0 side that wanted to make Bitcoin more like a financial service and not just send it and receive coins.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also the cypherpunk side that discovered ways to make Bitcoin private. And the first proposals was by Matthew D. Green, who is a researcher, I think, at the Johns Hopkins University. And he came up with this zero coin paper, which was trying to make Bitcoin private with zero knowledge proofs. And zero knowledge proofs are this technology which at the time was considered to be only theoretical, and it had no implementation in practice. There were no actual libraries to make it happen. But this guy had an actual idea. And then I think that summer it was a very hot topic. It seemed obvious that Bitcoin is going to become private with zero coin. And if you look back, the cover of Bitcoin magazine from July of 2013 had a picture of this anonymous type of user, like the anonymous mask that was popular at the time. And the text was zero coin, Bitcoin privacy perfected. So it was a major talking point in June, July. And then in August of 2013, Bitcoin Core developer Greg Maxwell posted on Bitcoin Talk a thread that's called CoinJoin Bitcoin Privacy for the World. And basically, what he described there was what actually ended up being implemented in Wasabi Wallet and Samurai. But the reason why he did that was that this was a response to the zero coin soft fork proposal. And basically, it was a way of saying, well, until we actually get this, which requires consensus from users to activate, we can still have the CoinJoin, which is not as good, but is still something that we can use. So this was the reason and the consideration behind the CoinJoin. And zero coin was not considered to be good enough, so they made a new paper with more researchers from more universities that was called Zero Cash. I think this was the next year in 2014. And it seemed like the obvious way to go, and a lot of cypherpunks in Bitcoin were excited, and they were thinking they're going to add privacy through this. Interestingly, it was proposed first as a soft fork to Bitcoin. It did not get enough consensus. And then they wanted to do it as a sidechain to Bitcoin, because in the year 2014, we also had the sidechain paper from Blockstream. It was, I think 2013 and 2014 are actually the most interesting years, because nowadays what we see being developed is still can be dated to that moment, because it takes a lot of research and development. Ultimately, there was no result with this attempt, and Zcash launched as an altcoin eventually. It's basically a clone of Bitcoin. It copies everything that Satoshi left us, but adds the zero cash protocol, which is like this shielded pool, this anonymity place where you can put your coins, and they're indistinguishable from each other. And you don't know the amount that's being sent. You don't know who sends and to whom. All you see is that there is a transaction, and it's the most advanced privacy that we have even today. This protocol and its cryptography have been refined over the last 9 years since Zcash launched. And I think today it's more ready than ever for adoption on Bitcoin. And that's why I sort of support it. And I'm like a cheerleader, because I hope that if more people care about Zcash and try it and understand what this is, maybe that they will think more seriously about bringing this to Bitcoin, which would actually make the currency more fungible and would lead to many of these issues where people complain about filtering transactions. I think it would solve some of these issues, because privacy is not just about the user, but it's also about the system itself. When you can distinguish between one transaction and the other, the system is not very censorship resistant, because the miners can choose not to include certain transactions in blocks. And Bitcoin will be completely neutral and censorship resistant when it actually has a way to not distinguish between transactions.
Do you
Long
think?
rant, I'm sorry.
No. Do you think that that could actually happen? Because what I'm hearing from this, that like scaling and privacy doesn't go hand in hand together, and it's very hard to implement, especially like when it comes to Bitcoin. So, and with the new regulations, especially here in Europe, it might be kind of like impossible to actually do so.
Yeah, I still think it can happen, because Zcash has this design where they have the open ledger and the shielded pool, and you can move coins back and forth. The open ledger was created initially for the purpose of being able to verify the supply to be sure that there is no inflation. But I think nowadays it's very convenient from the perspective of being listed on exchanges and being accepted by regulators, because they say, well, we have this transparent side and you can see what's happening in there. And then we have the privacy side, which is for people who don't want to leak their transactions to everyone else on the blockchain. But most services are going to require, I think, transparent addresses. So, yeah, if they do want to track some transactions, they will be able to. And even if the privacy is perfect, we have to understand that it's being used by humans, and humans make mistakes, and they also use other forms of communication, like they send messages, they make phone calls, they travel around. Like it's hard to have privacy in real world, in meet space. Maybe it's more easy to have privacy on the internet. And if there's always this concern about how do you enforce the law if everything is private. It's humans, everyone makes mistakes. So it's just like before, when people were sending out letters and they were putting a fake address or something, and they were trying to understand who wrote the letter. And they were thinking, well, now we have, oh, it's so difficult because we have to find the handwriting of this person or whatever. It's not like that. They just have to ask questions, and eventually the person who did it will reveal themselves, because they talk to someone about it, or they make some flaw, like some terrible mistake that will lead to their identity.
So then, what does like privacy mean to you in that sense? Then you don't think that like everyday privacy is that important in general then?
No, I never said that. Oh, it's super important. For example, why should your neighbor know how much money you have because it's on some sort of open ledger? Why should your boss know what you're doing with your money? Like you're getting paid with Bitcoin, right? And your boss knows that he paid you with this amount, and then they can look into your wallet to see how you spent it and where you spent it.
Mhm.
Like it's not a convenient design, and most people don't care about privacy. Like we can go on all day about why this is important and why I care about it, but most people will not make any effort. Even though I think nowadays when people get paid in Bitcoin, they just send it to an exchange and they sell it for fiat.
I mean, if you want to, like, if you have to spend for your everyday, like, things that you need to buy, then you need to sell some part of it in fiat, that's for sure. But then not necessarily like everything in general. And you can also like borrow against it now. So like there are multiple options to actually like do it. I mean, in an ideal world, we would just like have Bitcoin, and then I would pay you in Bitcoin, and I would pay for my coffee in Bitcoin as well. But we are not there yet. At least the adoption is not there yet.
Yeah, and we also have these second layers on Bitcoin, but none of them actually got a lot of users. And unfortunately, the way in which they got adopted by users is the custodial one, which is no different from banks. And the only excuse that people have for custodians is, well, at least you're using Bitcoin because it's sound money and blah, blah, blah. I don't like it. It's not the reason why I'm here. It's not the reason why I liked Bitcoin the first time. I was thinking it's this asset that you have and that gives you absolute freedom. You get to choose whatever you want to do with it and you use it however you want. And if you can't, because it's somebody else's custody and they can choose to limit the way that you spend, it's just a CBDC with extra steps.
I mean, yeah, okay, yeah, that's you could see it from that perspective, that's for sure. But then, if you talk about privacy, then how do you make other people care about privacy, or like, what do you like? How do you try to enlighten someone when they don't know anything about, for example, like Bitcoin or being private, or
I think that most people, when they think about privacy, they have this conception that they gotta hide from their government, and that's it. That's like the end goal. Like they must be doing something illegal. And first of all, it's very relative. Like depends on your government, because what I do on a daily basis might be illegal in a lot of places in the world. I'm pretty sure that there are parts of the world like North Korea where I'm potentially a criminal just for speaking what I'm speaking and having my ideas.
Mhm.
And just because my government is nice right now and protects my individual freedoms does not mean that it's going to be the same way in the future. And there's actually I mean, you're from Hungary, you know the story very well. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that just because it's legal, it's moral or it's best for you as an individual. And ultimately, we should be guided by our moral compass and understanding of whether or not we're harming someone. And if we're not harming anyone, it's not a crime. If there's no victim or anything, then it's not really a crime. But the governments tend to be nosy and want to know everything about what you're doing and control what you're doing, and they will say it's for your own safety.
Mhm.
But privacy is not binary like this. There are layers to it. Like you want to be private against your neighbor, even though in my part of the world people like to flex on their neighbors and say, oh, look at me, I'm so rich and you're so poor, and I make more money than you do. But I think in opposite terms. Like I don't want my neighbors, one, if you ask my neighbors what I'm doing, they will say, oh, he works in computer stuff. And that's the way in which I want them to think. And I don't want them to think that I'm doing anything interesting, because honestly, I just want to maintain good relations. I don't want to make them jealous or whatever. I just want to keep it at minimal knowledge of our business. And there's also your boss who pays you, or your collaborator or whatever. They should not know how much money you have and what you did with the money that you received from them. There's also the shop from where you buy. Like if you go to your corner shop and you use cash, first of all, the seller is not going to know who you are. They don't know your name. You can go there for 10 years, 20 years every day and still they don't know your name. The same
Mhm.
person that's selling stuff to you. They just maybe know what you're buying, and they don't know how much money you have in your wallet. In the case of Bitcoin, every time you make a transaction, you reveal how much money you have in that UTXO, which is part of your wallet. So the person receiving the transaction can look on the blockchain and see how much you actually have.
Mhm.
It's not a good design.
I mean, it depends, because I use separate wallets for my actual funds and then for the funds that I'm actually spending. So it depends, definitely, like, on the situation, um, whether they can see it or not. And if you are like storing something on an exchange, then it might as well be just a bank, because then they can freeze your account, and then the exchange sees like what's your actual like holdings, and then probably like the others doesn't see it in general, because then it goes into a general exchange address. But then the government can still know everything about you, since you are KYC'd at that exchange, and then they can just basically ask for your details there. So and right now, just I think this week or last week, there was a huge data leak from one of the opposition parties in Hungary, because there is like someone challenging Orban at the moment, and then basically people who are supporting that party registered in one of the applications, and then someone from the ruling party decided to hack the system and then publish all the data that was found in the application, and then they basically put it on a map, and people can basically search for their town or their city or the name of their friends and see if they are supporting the opposition party, and then they show up on the map with name, email address, phone number, and everything, like all the data that they have about themselves, which is like, I think it's illegal in general, but even in like the European Union like sense, it's more than um, just a data leak, or more than illegal. But apparently it was done by Ukrainian hackers, so it's everyone is washing their hands, and then but people in Hungary in general start to like think about privacy now. So I know that they had to reach this point until like someone is trying to hurt a big group of people to make the public think about privacy, and not in a sense of like, oh, like are they doing something illegal, or like everyone who is like taking care of their own data, or thinking about their own privacy is a criminal, but just trying to like support someone else than the one that is ruling at the moment.
Tudtad, hogy a Bitcoin-bázisnak van egy saját webshopja is? Na ott tényleg minden megtalálható, ami egy bitcoinernek vagy kriptorajongónak kellhet. Hardware tárcák, könyvek, kiegészítők, meg persze néhány menü ajándék is. Nálunk nem csak forinttal, hanem bitcoinon és altcoinokkal is fizethetsz teljesen biztonságosan. Ráadásul, ha bitcoinnal fizetsz, automatikusan 10% kedvezményt kapsz. Szóval, ha legközelebb hardware tárcát keresel, vagy meglepnéd magad valami kriptós cuccal, nézd be a bitcoinbázis.hu/shop oldalra, mert így nem csak magadnak, hanem a podcastnak is segítesz.
What's your take on like growing up in Romania? How did like this? How do you think this like post-communist environment shaped our view in the area of freedom and authority?
Well, it's complicated, but I guess you know most of the story. I don't think our experiences were too different growing up. I presume you grew up in the 90s also.
2000s, but
Okay. So in the 90s, it was much more rough, I think. It was wild. I was not aware of a lot of the stuff that was happening around me, but I could see that nobody was doing really well. And we had all of these events, like I think in 1994 we had an inflation of 260% or something. So there was hyperinflation, there was forced privatization of formerly nationalized companies, and it was also a sense of chaos. Like nobody actually knew what's going on. There was a lot of uncertainty, and it was difficult to navigate through this. If there was something like Bitcoin for people to just have a neutral currency, something that they can hold and not be affected by the government as much, I think that would have been very useful. Because I think the ones who actually got rich from all of this situation were the ones who exchanged their money into US dollars. But in order to exchange your money into US dollars, like you had to be a very higher up member of some political party or of the secret police or whatever, because the access to exchanges was limited. And the liquidity for US dollars in Eastern Europe was also low. And there was no way to open an account in US dollars. You actually had to get cash and hold it in your house, and that was difficult. So yeah, it was rough. It made me, so when I discovered Bitcoin, of course, I had to look at it from the lens of someone who grew up in Eastern Europe. And I did learn stories from my grandma, for example, how basically her parents lost everything when the communists came at the end of World War II. And then she had to grow up in communism. And My parents also have this story that they had their wedding 1 month before the communist regime fell. So they had their wedding in November of 1989. A month later, there was the revolution. What they did after the wedding is to collect all the money that they raised, because that's how weddings work. You get a lot of money from people. And they deposited that to get a new car. And to get a car in communist Romania, you had to wait for like 3 years. You paid for it up front, and then you waited for it to get built and delivered to you. And after the regime collapsed, they could not get the car anymore because nobody knew exactly what's going to happen to the factory, who's going to own it, whether or not they're going to build the same stuff. So they were able to get their money back a couple of years later. But the same amount of money that they deposited for the car was only enough money to buy a couch because of inflation. So this story is always in the back of my mind, and it makes me realize that you should not trust your government money too much. And basically, all of these fiat currencies are manipulated and controlled for the benefit of a small elite. And you should try to stay outside of this game as much as you can to protect yourself. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that the story of my family is not unique, and there are a lot of families that had the same experience and had to go through situations where they lost everything because of inflation and had to start from scratch, had to keep working on their jobs and save money or find ways to not get burned. Basically, at one point, my dad told me that he was receiving his salary 2 times a month because the currency was losing value so fast that you wanted to spend it as quickly as you got your hands on money.
Wow. I mean, yeah, but it's just very interesting how like these things are like going in like circles. So then we had the Second World War, then like they lost everything in the war. And then we had the communism, and then they lost everything due to communism. And then it's what is the common denominator? It's always the government. So then you would think that like people would try to probably remember of what happens like 10, 15 years back, and then think ahead like, okay, like how am I going to be more independent? What is like the step that I can take to actually make myself more independent from the government, or like from not the whole community, because you cannot really do that, but like at least from the government. And that would be like the straight answer is now Bitcoin. I mean, back in the days, it was gold, or it was like possibly like one of the instruments that you could use. But now it's just you just buy Bitcoin, and then
Yeah, but getting gold was also difficult. You had to know the right person, you had to buy it in the quantity that you needed, and then you had to secure it, which was also difficult. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy with Bitcoin, but it's easier than gold.
yeah, that's for sure. But yeah, and it's also like, but there is like a parallel, or like I can hear a parallel between the surveillance that happened back in the days, because you started with saying that like you don't want your neighbor to know of what you are actually doing, and then back in the days, like they were reporting on each other, and then they were like, oh, have you seen that the neighbor has a an extra pig? That they didn't report to the
Yeah,
government.
so non-Eastern European listeners of this show will not understand, but every building, every block of apartments had at least one person reporting to the secret police. At least one. And you had to be very careful what kind of information you're leaking about your family and what you're doing. They wanted to know even what kind of radio you're listening to, because radio waves were not censorable. They could not stop them from being received. And there were two radio stations outside of the communist bloc, basically, that were transmitting. There was Radio Free Europe, and there was the Voice of America. And those two were basically presenting news against communism and from the other perspective. And if you're listening to this in your home and your neighbors knew about it, there was a chance that they were going to report to you. And the kind of punishment that you could get would range from losing your job and being sent to some dead-end town doing something very boring, like a humiliating kind of job, to actually being sent to a forced labor camp. And if you went to a forced labor camp, you would have to basically dig with your shovel or dig into some sort of salt mine with your pickaxe for 10, 20 years. They would not care if you died on the job. They would not take care of you in any way. There are lots of stories of people who criticized communism and then they ended up working these jobs and dying on the job. And there's also something I want to mention about communism. When they came in 1948, if I'm not mistaken, what they did first was to change the money. So they replaced the money that existed before World War II with a new currency. And basically, the exchange rate at the time was 1 to 20. So if you owned a lot of money, you could only get 5% of that in the new currency. It was considered a way to basically burn the savings of the rich class because they were communists. And they were still not happy with what happened at the time. So in 1953 or 1954, they changed the money once again. And they also started to take from people's saving accounts. So even in the old currency, which was considered to be more communist friendly, they were not happy with the distribution. So they once again did the same scheme to make sure that the rich are no longer rich, or only the people that they want can still stay rich.
And most of the time, the people that they wanted to actually make rich were the people that they could control, and then weren't like the smartest knife in the drawer, or like how do you have
Yeah,
this
I know.
saying in English? I'm not sure. But yeah, this surveillance for me, it's, or like this type of like system, and today's system is not so much different in a sense when it comes to Hungary, to be honest, when I think of it, because digital surveillance just made it easier to actually listen into people's conversation in their own homes. And here in Hungary, we had multiple like scandals about this, how they were using systems to actually listen in on people's phone, and then their private conversations, and then you can just accidentally open a window in your laptop or in your computer, and then 2 minutes later they know everything about you. So
No, for us, it's very funny because listening to phones used to be a communist practice and people were afraid of it. They were afraid to talk on the phone with their family and tell them what happened or what they're not happy about. So, part of the constitution that they framed in 1991 after the revolution actually says that communications, and especially letters and all sorts of written communication, should be secret. But then we actually had to join NATO and the European Union, and we had to implement this big brother framework for laws to counter terrorism. And it's very funny because when you look at Romania, you're like, which terrorism? Like, what actually happened here that you can say was a terrorist event? Did we ever have someone blowing themselves up or something? No. Did we have an airplane hitting some sort of tall building? No. We never had any such emergency, but they say, well, it's for national security and you have to understand. But people, I guess, don't care too much because the consequences are not obvious. Like, it's not like during communism when they would come and pick you up from your home because you said, fuck communism on the phone or something. Now you can criticize the regime, you can say whatever you want, but I think there are some keywords like, hey, do you have the explosive or whatever? If you say this on the phone, maybe that they start to track you more.
well, the thing is, like, I'm not sure about Romania because I'm not really up to date with the regime there at the moment. But like I know that in Hungary, if you are like, for example, like writing for a newspaper that is very critical about like the systems in general, so you don't need to like support any of the political parties. But if you are just a critical voice, then they're gonna find you, and in some way they're gonna disable you from reaching your goals. So, for example, they're gonna try to freeze your bank accounts. They're gonna not gonna accept your kids into the schools, and then all these like, I mean, they're not gonna send you to a gulag or to a camp that you need to work in, but at the same time, it can make your life not like very difficult, so not very easy to enjoy or to do your day-to-day life. So it's still like something, I think, if the things stay how they are at the moment for another 5-10 years, then we might as well like shift back into communism, because this is just a joke that is going on. And Bitcoin.
Well, I disagree with that. Like, even if you have fewer liberties in terms of free speech, at least you have your economic rights, which you can keep. In communism, you also lose that. So you're saying that if you don't have free speech, you might as well also lose your economic rights. I disagree.
No, like I'm not saying that you might as well. I'm saying that in Hungary, that's what they do. So that's how they try to like limit your actual like day-to-day lives. So they try to limit your access to your bank account. Then they're gonna freeze your bank account, and then at some point, like you're not gonna have access to the same internet provider as the other ones. So it's step by step. They So you are like, for example, now you have the European Union, the standards or like the opportunities or the projects that you can go for because of the European Union. And then here in Hungary, if you are not someone that is like very well connected in the government, then you can forget about like winning any of those like kind of project competitions to implement something new in Hungary, because um, whoever is the judge of that who gets the money in Hungary is mostly like related to the party. So like these kind of things.
I basically know your work background without even you telling me your work background right now. Because you know some very specific details about a certain situation.
No, I have friends in multiple different areas that are like related to the European Union, and I have a couple of like journalist friends as well that are out there, and they are experiencing this. So it's not me personally. I just moved back to Hungary, so to be honest, it's for me it's like less painful, that's for sure, and I'm all in on Bitcoin, so that's not really something that will concern me on the long run. But in general, like I'm scared for my friends and for my family. Just yeah.
And once again, it's good that we have this technology, and I can go on all day to say ways in which we can make it better, which I think is healthy to talk about improvements, but at the same time, we should be grateful that it's even there.
That's for sure. And can you tell me about like so I saw that on your podcast you say that you are a Bitcoin maximalist, and I would want to know like what does it mean to you, because then we talked about so many different layers of Bitcoin and Litecoin and Zcash, and so what does it mean to you to be a Bitcoin maxi?
So the definition of the term initially, if you go back to the article that was written in 2014 by Vitalik Buterin, it referred to someone telling Vitalik that whatever he's going to build on Ethereum, Bitcoin will take and make better. And this was the vision at the time, that altcoins are the experimentation layer, and then Bitcoin is going to look at what's happening in altcoins and implement it in a better and more scalable and more elegant way. The problem is that the culture changed from, obviously it's normal for stuff to change over 11 years, but nowadays people are just complacent and they say Bitcoin is perfect and we shouldn't change anything about it. But in fact, it still has some issues that need to be solved. And I guess to people who are just tourists and they just want to take their fiat money gains and go, maybe that this is not important. But to me, it's very important for Bitcoin to follow its path of becoming the ultimate internet money. and something that people use for savings, for payments, for contracts, for privacy, for everything that they find interesting. For me, Bitcoin maximalism is about maximizing what Bitcoin does. That's what maximalism should be about. What other people understand nowadays with maximalism is that there should be Bitcoin in the current form and nothing else. And everything else that is not Bitcoin is a horrible shitcoin that you should not even take a look at. And I disagree with that. Even if they say that 99.9% of projects are scams and Ponzi's and whatever, if you have that 0.1% that is allegedly interesting and useful, that means, according to the number of coins that we have on CoinMarketCap today, you have at least 100 projects that are somewhat interesting. And the people who tell you that Bitcoin is already perfect and you should not look into other projects are not developers, most likely, and they don't care much about open source. Because if you look at Linux, you have the Linux kernel, which is universal for all distributions, but you also have different versions of Linux that try different approaches. Like they try to optimize the software for different purposes. You have a Linux for servers, which is not user friendly. You have a Linux that looks just like Windows that tries to be user friendly. You have a Linux for video games. You have a Linux for multimedia editing and whatever. And at its core, it's sort of the same technology but used for something different. And if you look at Bitcoin the same way as you look at Linux, it makes a lot more sense because it's software. The difference between Linux and Bitcoin is that in Bitcoin you actually have a token that is used on markets and has a value and is being transacted, and there's competition between currencies. But I think it's foolish to not look at. So right now Bitcoin has a dominance of 60%. To say that the other 40% consists of only casino stuff is foolish and I guess short-sighted. There's a lot of research that was supposed to come to Bitcoin that never actually came because of this culture of not tolerating any research. And unfortunately, Ethereum, for example, benefited a lot. So whenever Bitcoiners were fighting in 2017, 2018, that's when Ethereum really became the number two and became the project that established itself as the one that's friendly to developers, the one where you can build and nobody's going to ask you questions like, why do you want to build it and why should we care? You can just build it without asking for anyone's permission. And nowadays I see the same thing happening with Zcash because it went up a lot over the last couple of months. And it was on the back of Bitcoiners fighting about the filters. And I think a lot of these people just became sick of it and they realized that privacy is the only way you can actually end the filter debate. Because if you can't distinguish between transactions, then miners are not going to be filtering anything. And that's when actually you have a neutral global currency. And ironically, it was Ethereum that took more of Zcash's technology because zero knowledge proofs were a big deal. They existed only in literature and academic talk, but they were never put into practice. Because of Zcash, we have today zero knowledge proofs in other applications like ZK rollups. In the case of Ethereum, there are a bunch of them. In the case of Bitcoin, we have two major ones that will be released over the next year. And once again, this goes back to Zcash. The first one is called Citrea, and basically it will use Bitcoin as a data layer where they put zero knowledge proofs. But what they build is this other blockchain where they're going to be using all of Ethereum's features, but denominated in BTC as opposed to ETH. So we're going to have Ethereum on Bitcoin with all the features. And the other one is called Alpen, and they're also building something similar. And it's interesting because we're going to scale Bitcoin, we're going to add contracts to Bitcoin, but there are users who don't understand why this matters and why it's important. And I wish we had sort of a change in culture, which is also the reason why I'm still going with my podcast and I interview mostly developers building different kinds of stuff for Bitcoin or for other projects which Bitcoin can just copy. And this is the pursuit. This is what Bitcoin maximalism is about to me. Trying to find the best way to bring everything to Bitcoin, to use the 21 million coins for everything, and not have 100,000 different blockchains that are like separate islands waiting for a purpose to be assigned to them.
So, like, if I was someone that like understood nothing about Bitcoin, like, how would you try to convince me that Bitcoin is important, and how would you explain like why are these like developments are important to me as a person?
Well, if you're Hungarian, I mean, it's more obvious. I just go back to the history of your country. And that's, I think, a good way to get people to realize that their savings in their bank accounts are very fragile. And I have the same problem here in Romania. I think people have too much trust in a government that historically has screwed them over and over. In the US, it's a lot more difficult to tell people because the US dollar is the dominant currency around the world. It's the reserve currency of lots of governments. It's the one that people want and the one that people use as a unit of account. So to tell them, well, you should be saving in this one, it's more of a tough sell, I think. The only reason why is that it actually outperforms the US dollar. So they make more US dollars. But to Americans, it's more difficult to get them to care about a universal kind of money which is neutral from a political point of view and does not have the issues of fiat currencies. I think a lot of the early users come from the US, and if you look at the Bitcoin white paper, the references are mostly US cryptographers. So in lots of ways, Bitcoin is American.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, the adoption might be like easier and faster in not in Europe in general, but like for example, third world countries where they already skipped the phase of the banking system because we are so comfortable with the banks, and then it's just so easy to use um, the Swift and the Giro systems that we can just like send money here and there, and then it takes only like a second or like 2 minutes to actually receive it. But yeah, for the countries that have no working banking system, the adoption might be faster. But in the US, they are very like forward thinking, so it's like very easy for them to adopt something that is and also now due to Trump, the administration highlighted Bitcoin so many times, and then I think they accepted it as a reserve currency as well. I don't know.
Yeah, they said basically that they're not going to sell any of the Bitcoin that the government holds. But it's been difficult, and I know a bunch of journalists who are trying this to figure out just how many Bitcoins are in the custody of the US government. Because the Biden administration, it seems like they sold some of it before they left.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's, what's her name? She is the leading journalist of a publication that's called The Rage. Lola, I think, is her name. And she sent an email to the department of the US government that deals with the treasury. And they asked, how much Bitcoin do you own? And they reported much less than it was reported previously. So it seems like maybe the Biden administration sold some, or maybe Trump in the early days sold some. It's unclear. And it's not a transparent measurement. And the coins that they own are essentially coming from coins that they stole from regular people.
Oh, okay.
So it's not like they bought them on the free market. They just confiscated them from people that they arrested.
Oh, okay. Wow. Still a step further than actually like it was before, or like a step further than banning it. But yeah, that's definitely not like taking the markets to another high. Okay, so how do you think that adoption is gonna like continue in the next like couple of years? Do you see like a general adoption, or like how do you see it? Like,
I mean, practically, I don't see it too much because we have all of these convenient banking services that people use.
mhm.
And I think there are people in my country who use, for example, Revolut as the Bitcoin because they think it's something that their government cannot touch
Oh yeah, yeah.
just because it's from another jurisdiction, and there's more effort involved in order to freeze that account. But I think, for example, the European Union is a very good marketing team for Bitcoin and for privacy, because they're trying to implement this digital euro, which is coming in the next 2 or 3 years. And once we realize that it's basically a way to control the way that we use our money, and it's not Bitcoin at all, it's just trying to copy the technology but without the freedom, more people are gonna want to use Bitcoin, and they're gonna understand because they get an exposure to the technology, and there's not gonna be much of a challenge anymore. And for them, it's gonna be obvious that the one that they want to use is actually Bitcoin. So I think that the closer we get to CBDC, it's not even adoption, it's more like a forced rollout where people are supposed to be giving up on their cash for something which is 100% controllable by the central bank, the easier it becomes for us to promote Bitcoin, because it's technologically similar and it's the free and open protocol that people want to be using.
Well, we will see like how it's gonna turn out, but like definitely in the next like 5-10 years we will see how CBDCs are actually like gonna be rolled out, because they've been talking about CBDC for 3-4 years now, and it's like very very slow how they can actually implement anything like that.
But I think it was like 2 weeks ago that they said in 2028 or something that they're gonna roll it out for the first time, and that their early experiments were successful and they're optimistic about the development. Maybe it gets cancelled. I hope it does, because for me as a Bitcoiner, the CBDC would be beneficial because a lot of people will be buying Bitcoin. And I like to think about Bitcoin as a bet against a chaotic and unfair world. Like if we were actually governed by angels and perfect people who cared about us, we would have no need for Bitcoin whatsoever. But the worse the world is gonna get, the more need we're gonna have for Bitcoin.
Mhm. Yeah, that's for sure. No, like when I said that like they've been talking about this CBDCs for 3-4 years, I meant like I think in 2020 or 2021 I've been to one of the Hungarian central banks um, show where they showcased how they are working on a CBDC for Hungary in general, and then they haven't really like moved forward with that, thanks God. But it's just probably like delayed because of the euro in general. How do you see like how is the MiCA situation influencing the market in Romania? Is it like the same as the European Union version, or did they add an extra layer to it as well?
What do you mean more exactly?
Because for example here they implemented the MiCA in a different way, so it's way more strict, and you actually have to like go through multiple rounds of the licensing if you want to implement a company that is like doing anything in crypto or Bitcoin, and you want to get licensed in Hungary for the MiCA.
I think MiCA sort of killed adoption for Bitcoin. There were 5 or 6 shops in my country that accepted Bitcoin for various stuff, mostly computer shops. And they stopped accepting for a very simple reason. It's just too much work to get the MiCA license. And for the amount of money that they were making, because they were not holding the Bitcoin, they were selling it on some sort of exchange. And for the amount of work and the amount of money that they were making, it was just not worth it to continue accepting Bitcoin, so they dropped it. And it's really unfortunate. There were shops that have been accepting since 2013 or something, so 12 years of accepting Bitcoin to buy computer parts. And then suddenly they realized, okay, due to regulations, it makes no sense to keep going with this. I also know that there are some Bitcoin specific businesses like ATMs which are struggling to find like the good way to adopt MiCA, because they do have to. So KYC will be mandatory for all users of these ATMs. Right now, I think under 2,000 euro, which is 10,000 Romanian lei, it's not mandatory to enforce KYC. But in the future, even for €1, they will have to present their ID card. And it's really unfortunate. It's going to kill a lot of adoption. But on the other hand, it's going to enable black markets. And people will just meet in a dark alley and exchange Bitcoin for cash or for gold or for whatever. So the government thinks that they're going to collect more taxes if they do this, but I think it's going to happen in the exact opposite direction. People will get more creative. I think in Czech Republic, they built something that's called Vexel.
Yeah. It's like meet your friend and then buy your Bitcoin from a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think local Bitcoins is going to have a new golden age coming up in the next couple of years. That's for sure.
I'm not sure if local Bitcoin specifically, because they shut that one down, I think, or they made KYC mandatory.
Oh, okay.
But I think one that is still like local Bitcoins back in the day is Huddle Huddle. And there's also Vexel, which is like an app. And you connect with people. It's sort of like Tinder. You meet people and you exchange Bitcoin. And I think that one's going to get a lot of adoption.
And like, how do you see your podcast there? Like, if you imagine Bitcoin Takeover in 10 years from now, like, what do you hope it's gonna stand for?
Oh, man. Like, I've only been doing this for almost 7. If I go for another 10, I'll be old. I don't know. I have no idea. I haven't thought that far ahead. I was thinking about reaching my 10-year anniversary, which is going to happen in 3 years. But 10 more years of this, I mean, it should be fun because there's a lot happening and I never seem to run out of people to interview and stuff to learn. But I have no idea. I hope I'm going to keep going because it's fun. But who knows? It's a long time. 10 years. I can't really envision the future so much ahead. But I hope by then Bitcoin will be much better than it is today. We're going to have privacy. We're going to scale better. We're going to have more adoption. And it's going to be maybe accepted as... So, for example, when you go to an exchange desk, there are a lot of these places where you can exchange, for example, the Hungarian forint for US dollars in cash. Maybe that all of these places will also adopt Bitcoin in the future. And it's also going to be a popular currency on Forex markets. That's something that I would like to see. That's the kind of adoption that proves that people want to get their hands on Bitcoin, not just speculation.
Yeah, that would be actually fun. And you could just like travel around with your Bitcoin and not care about like exchanging it into any currency.
I mean, I already do that.
Yeah, yeah, but you use some kind of card that exchanging it to fiat, right? So like, I mean, like
No, I just meet people.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I don't like banks and cards. I never created one of these cards to spend my coins.
Wow, that's...
I should also mention that the 2008 financial crisis was one of the dumbest moments in the history of our countries, I guess. Because you had to deal with... I'm not sure how old you were at the time, but you just had to wake up one morning and realize, okay, we're in a crisis. Why? Because of American banks. What American banks? Well, this, and this. But we don't even have them in our country. Like, why are we even affected by this? Well, it doesn't matter. You basically have to pay more tax by 5% for everything you buy. And everyone's salary is going to get cut by 25%. And we're just going to have to deal with this crisis. And you're like, why? This is stupid. And it blows my mind that people still trust banks after this experience. And for Greece, for example, it was horrible. In Greece, they actually had withdrawal limits like €100 per day. It didn't matter how much money you had in your account. You had to wait in line at the ATM, and you could only get €100 per day. That's humiliating. And people still don't seem to adopt Bitcoin at a large scale in spite of this.
To be honest, I don't really remember because I was in middle school. The only thing I remember from the tales that like my family told me about, like how they, like everyone was encouraged to take loans, and then the loans was based in Swiss franc, and then there was an inflation of the Hungarian forint towards other currencies. So basically, like if they loaned like 30 million Hungarian forints, then they had to pay 90 back. And then it was like a very, very crazy time for them. And then everyone like lost their homes and all these things. So that's the only thing I remember. But like, I was still not, I mean, I know I should have bought Bitcoin in middle school, but I wasn't like...
I don't think there was even a way for you to buy it. Like maybe you needed to have a PayPal account and go to some shady website and trust that they're gonna send you their Bitcoin. But 2008, 2009, there was no actual exchange. 2010 maybe, but it was shady. Like you had to trust that these people are gonna send you the Bitcoin. And then once again, when it was worth less than $1, and then it went to, let's say, $3, I'm pretty sure you would sell it.
Yeah, I mean that's for sure. I mean we did do that in 2014, 2015 when we were in like high school already. We were playing with like a game called Satoshi Mines, and then one of our friends was like exchanging it to Hungarian forints. So and then he used local bitcoins to actually do the trades. And then as soon as like it went up by I mean, there were like daily 20-30% volatility. So we could actually like just wait out the day and then see, okay, like I reached my 30% and then we sold. So that was...
I mean, in hindsight, maybe you have regrets, but at the time it was so cool.
It was cool. I didn't know. So how would I mean, if I didn't do that, but I did back in the days, then I wouldn't have got the knowledge, and then I wouldn't have been able to actually experience all this. And then I didn't have money. So like, how would I bought more if I had, I don't know, my lunch money to play with? Like, it was not really like...
Also, nobody knows the future. Like, we have to understand this. Nobody knows the future. There's no way to actually know what's going to happen.
Exactly. So is there anything outside of Bitcoin that gives you like the same kind of like spark of meaning or rebellion kind of feeling that you experience in your life?
Outside of Bitcoin.
Outside of Bitcoin. That is not related to Bitcoin.
So I do like a lot of the privacy technology that's being built. I feel like it's very useful to encrypt your communications, even something as basic as Signal, or the fact that people are migrating from WhatsApp, which, as far as I know, integrated chat control from the European Union, and they can see through your messages. The fact that they migrate to Signal or Telegram, that's still a net benefit. The fact that you have open source mobile operating systems like Graphene and Calyx is also something that gives me hope that, I mean, they're not popular, they're not super used, but they're out there and people work on this, and they're like something like Noah's Ark, you know? When you actually need it, it's there and you can take it and use it. It doesn't have to be super popular at this point, but people work on it. There's genuine interest in it, and some people are idealistic and they're working to build for a future which might become very ugly. It's good to have protection against a very ugly future.
Yeah, and we all need to prepare for that. And then what is your like privacy stack or like preparing stack that you would like say to someone that just stumbled upon this episode or like stumbled upon Bitcoin and crypto in general? Like, what should they do? Like, what's the first thing they should leave WhatsApp behind and then move to Signal? And then apart from that, like, try a VPN and then maybe buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, and look into ways to make Bitcoin private, but ways that are not custodial, because there are also some darknet mixers which are operating, but you have to trust that they're gonna give you your coins back, first of all, and secondly, you're gonna be mixing again alongside some of the people you don't want to be associated with, so you have to be wary of that. Maybe try also complementary projects like Zcash and Monero and understand what they're doing and how they're doing it, because some of that technology is compatible with Bitcoin. And don't let yourself fall in this trap of zero sum thinking or only thinking about what's performant on the markets. Think in terms of usefulness, because all of these are tools, they're software. You don't have to hold it. You can just buy like $10 of it and play with it and learn something new. And I think that's useful. Also, run nodes. It's an important skill. Download the software, run it on your computer, see what it does. It's part of the journey, and understand that you don't need to buy different hardware. It doesn't have to be an expensive journey. You already have a laptop, you already have maybe at least 10 gigabytes of storage and a stable internet connection. You're good to go. You're all set.
Is there anything that we didn't talk about during the podcast that you think would be beneficial for our listeners to hear today?
I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of information here. If you are technically minded and curious, you can check out my podcast. If you just want to know like the surface level stuff, then don't. It's better if you just stay away, to be honest. Because I don't get any benefit from someone who just tunes in one time and then they realize it's not for them and never come back. Like, seriously, it's just one click, one view, or whatever. I'm trying to save you time here. It's for the people who actually want to escape this newbie mentality and this surface level understanding of how stuff works and want to see what else is out there. The way in which I understand Bitcoin is that it's valuable not just because of markets and the way that people trade it, but also because people build on it. So the current valuation is given by the current liquidity on the market, but the future valuation is given by the fact that people build for it and there's hope for the future. And for as long as we still have hope for the future, I think that I'm bullish and confident that Bitcoin is going to succeed as a project. For as long as we are fighting for stuff as trivial as, well, which transaction gets filtered and which version of the software we should be running, I think that's really stupid. And maybe it's a consequence of what we wanted for mass adoption, because we had some of the dumbest people joining and thinking that they have a voice too and they should talk. And I'm gonna stop talking about this because it's a delicate topic.
We go too long.
But I do think that we should look at the smartest people around and try to learn from them and see what they're building. Because as much as we want sometimes something to be a democracy, it's really not. And democracies are good as political systems in meat space to make sure that there's a protection of the minority, and I think that's what democracy is about. That's the advantage. And also that you can remove the leaders that you don't like after a certain amount of time, so they don't control you forever. But for open source money projects, maybe it's good to have a system where you, of course we say don't trust, verify, but you have to trust the smartest people and the ones who are competent enough to build stuff. And you also have to trust experts who are going to be verifying that code. And if you don't want to trust, just start learning. But good luck. It's going to take you like 10 years at least to get there. But do it. Like if you don't have any major plans with your life and that's what you want to do, why not? Also read history. Read Bitcoin history. God damn it. It's all out there. Every altcoin that we have today that's interesting was going to get built on Bitcoin, and understand why it was not built on Bitcoin and whether or not you can still bring it to Bitcoin, because we do want this system to work. And if you want it to work, you need transactions to exist so that they can pay the miners and they can replace the subsidy that miners receive today, and it's going to get halved every 4 years. So just look into the history of Bitcoin and understand which projects are interesting and which ones are Ponzi's, and try to find ways to bring more utility to Bitcoin. I think that's an important part of the journey once you get past just understanding that it has 21 million coins and it runs on a blockchain.
Is there any book that you would recommend for someone to read about Bitcoin history?
Not really, no.
Okay.
I maybe that grokking Bitcoin is good because it's more technical and it helps you understand how transactions are being sent. Another one that's good is Crypto Economics by Eric Voskill. But other than these, which are already kind of advanced, it's better to just use your Grok or ChatGPT and ask questions that, I mean, okay, maybe you don't know what to ask because you don't know enough about how it works. But go to Bitcoin Talk. That's a free resource, and read some of the stuff from 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and understand that in the beginning, some of the smartest people were interested in Bitcoin. And many of these people are not around anymore. They went to other projects, they went to Zcash, they went to Ethereum, they went to something else. And understand why and how you can bring them back. I think that's a battle that's worth fighting. Also understand that the block size wars were basically very stupid, and we could be the same community with Bitcoin Cash still if we were not this violent, and it's not a good idea to be aggressive with people who are basically part of the same community. Try to unite and reach acceptable compromises instead of just saying, okay, just break away, create your own chain, let's split in 1,000 different chains. Because I think that's how we lose.
That's also applicable to real life, to be honest. Like at some point, you need to try to see things from another person's perspective as well, and find the middle ground in order to keep the peace and keep the technology and the advancement running. But thank you so much. I really appreciate our time here in the podcast episode. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge with us. And
it's not all of it. It's just like
no,
I could give you in
like
90 minutes.
so a little segment of it, because like if someone is interested on a deeper level, they should go and listen to your podcast, because it's actually amazing what you've been doing for the last 7 years, and I hope that you're gonna do it for the next 10 as well.
Well, I hope you keep going too, and you're gonna compete with me for guests.
Yeah, we will.
I mean, the best advice I can give you is to keep going. Like, no matter what, even when it seems like it's not going anywhere, just keep going, because people respect you more when you do something for a long time and when you're persistent. That's an undervalued quality, or how should I put it, adjective for people. Because think about it, Harrison Ford, the guy who played Han Solo in Star Wars and Indiana Jones, he went to Hollywood in 1965 and was not even one of the top actors for the first 15 years of his career. So he had to continue trying, and he had to get like a normal job. He was a carpenter fixing roofs in California. And he had to wait 15 years until he got his first major role as Han Solo in Star Wars. Before that, he was like this TV show actor who was showing up in one episode and getting killed, and that was it. So you have to understand that success comes in time, and you have to be patient, and your time is gonna come. Not just for you, Barbara, but for everyone else listening to this. Be persistent. It's very undervalued. People expect, especially in the internet age, to become viral overnight and become successful, but it's very rare. And even the people who go viral, they're gonna spend the rest of their life trying to chase the same success that they had, because they don't know why they had it. So it's sort of tragic when you have success very fast and then you have to go back and understand why you had it and get to the same level. It's more satisfying when it's gradual and you see from 1 month or 1 year to the other that there's some real growth.
That's for sure. And then I'm going to take your advice as well, and I'm going to interview the people that I'm interested in.
Exactly. That's the way to go.
There will be only like 200 people listening to those episodes, but I don't care.
Well, when you think about it, like 200 people means you can fill like a small concert hall.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It's a lot, even if people have expectations of millions of viewers on the internet, because a lot of people can click on your video. You should think about the quality of the people and not just the number. Like, who is actually listening?
Yeah, and our market is like, I mean, my market is the Hungarian one. So this episode will be translated into Hungarian, and then people who
Is there gonna be like a voice actor overdubbing?
No, there will be subtitles only. So it's a subtitle. But if you want, I can find the voice actors.
Again.
Oh my god. Do you speak Hungarian? Because we should have done it this.
No. I mean, I know a few words. I know goulash. I know shonka. We also have the same as called shunka in my country.
Okay. Well, then, I'm not sure if I can pick up like some Romanian words from my cousins that are actually like speak Romanian, but like next time we should do like a crossover episode where we try to speak each other's language and talk about Bitcoin.
Oh, that can be fun.
Yeah. It's like a new cross-cultural, like building bridges between cultures moment for our countries. Thank you so much, Vlad. I really appreciate your time and really this episode and everything that you shared today. And for people who want to check out your work and actually want to go deep dive in Bitcoin, we will link your podcast below and your Twitter account, because I think that's the one that you use mostly for communication.
Yeah, and also like this and subscribe and leave a comment and also leave a rating if you're, I don't know if this is going to get published on Spotify or something, but if it does, leave a rating there because it helps boost the content. Do that.
Yeah, please guys, do all this. And thank you for listening.